In a world carved by centuries of hatred, where elves of the light and dwarves of the mountain would rather die than stand on the same soil, one elf is about to commit the ultimate treason. He is a dark elf, an outcast shamed for the shadow magic in his blood, and he has just broken into the most sacred chamber of his kingdom. But it's not what he's come to do that shocks the entire elven council into silence. It's what he's carrying. In his arms is a wounded dwarven woman, his sworn enemy, and she is bleeding all over their hallowed ground. For this crime, the only sentence is death, and everyone, including his own father, is ready to deliver it. But this is not a simple story of mercy. The truth is far more terrifying. A mysterious curse, a bond forged in the chaos of battle, has tied their very souls together. The magical poison that is slowly turning her body to stone is also extinguishing the light within him. They are dying together, and the only people who might have a cure are the ones who have just sentenced them to burn. Now cast out and hunted, these two enemies must embark on an impossible journey, forced to rely on the one person in the world they were raised to despise. Can they overcome a lifetime of prejudice to find a cure, or will the ancient hatred between them be the very thing that destroys them both? The silence in the High Council chamber of Silverwood was 400 years old. It was a living thing, woven from starlight, ancient pacts, and the absolute certainty of elven superiority. That silence shattered when the great, moon-crested doors were thrown open, not with grace, but with the desperate force of a dying man. Every head, crowned with hair like spun gold and silver, turned. A collective gasp, sharp and horrified, ripped through the air as Kalen, the shadow touched, the stain on their luminous lineage, strode into the sacred light. He was not supposed to be there, but it was what he carried in his arms that froze their immortal hearts. Cradled against his dark, travel-worn leather armor was the stout, unmoving form of a dwarf. A dwarf woman, her braided, copper-colored hair matted with grime and something dark, her face pale as mountain stone. And she was bleeding onto the sacred floor. Kalen took 3 more agonizing steps before his legs trembled, the strain of 2 weeks of non-stop running finally catching up to him. He ignored the whispers that erupted like a nest of disturbed snakes, the looks of pure disgust on the faces of the council members, including the iciest one of all, the one belonging to his own father, Lord Theron. All he could feel was the chilling cold seeping from the dwarven woman in his arms. It wasn't just the wound on her side, clumsily bandaged with torn strips of his cloak. It was something else. A creeping, magical frost that seemed to be turning her flesh to granite. He could feel it because a faint, pulsing shadow on his own forearm mirrored the gray, vein-like pattern spreading up her arm. The curse. The bond. It was killing her faster now, and he could feel his own light dimming with every shallow breath she took. She needs a healer. Kalen's voice was a raw tear in the pristine tapestry of the chamber. He knelt, gently laying Brenna down on the cold, star-inlaid marble, his body forming a protective shield around her. By the ancient laws, I know my crime. To bring a creature of the mountain into the heart of the forest is treason, but by the name of the First Light, she will die if you do not help. He looked up, his gray eyes, so unlike the brilliant sapphire of his kin, pleading directly with his father. The pacts of hate that were signed 100 years ago mean nothing when a life is fading. This is not about the war. This is about a woman who was left to die. He didn't mention the orc attack. They wouldn't care. They would only see the dwarf. A hereditary enemy, a lesser being, defiling their sanctum. Lord Theron rose from his carved throne of living wood, his presence silencing the room instantly. At 458 years of age, he was the embodiment of elven grace and power, his face a mask of serene disappointment that was far more terrifying than any rage. "You speak of life," he said, his voice calm, yet every word was a shard of ice. "You, whose very birth 118 years ago was a shadow cast upon our house. You, who carry the legacy of the Great Schism in your blood. You dare to bring that thing here and lecture us on life." He gestured a dismissive hand towards Brenna. "Her kind are masters of stone and greed. Let the mountain claim her. It is her rightful place. Your crime, however, is ours to judge." He didn't see a dying woman. He He saw a political disaster, a breach of traditions, so profound it bordered on blasphemy. A weak groan escaped Brenna's lips, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. They were the color of rich, dark earth, and for a second, they found Kaelin's. There was no hate in them, only fear and a terrifying, shared understanding. He felt a sharp pang in his chest, a wave of cold that mirrored hers. The bond was tightening. He had to make them understand. "Father, you don't see," Kaelin pleaded, desperation cracking his voice. "Her wound is magical. A poison of creeping stone. And it is linked to me. We were bound by an artifact, a relic of the Forgotten Age. Her life force is tied to mine. When her heart stops, so will mine." He pulled up his own sleeve, revealing the shadowy veins pulsing in a sickly rhythm, a dark mockery of the life-giving sap that flowed through the trees around them. The council members murmured, some looking intrigued, others more horrified than before. Magic of that nature was forbidden, a twisted art that defied the natural separation of the races. Lord Theron's jaw tightened, the only sign of his fury. He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto the dark marks on his son's arm. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something. Was it fear? Concern? Crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold steel of duty. He stopped just feet from where Kaelin knelt over the dying dwarf, a towering figure of light judging a desperate creature of shadow. The silence returned, heavier and more menacing than before, pressing down on Kaelin, suffocating him. The entire chamber waited for the verdict. Lord Theron raised his hand, and the glowing runes on the walls brightened, casting away every shadow except the one Kaelin cast over the dwarf. "The law is absolute," his father declared, his voice echoing with finality. "For bringing an unhallowed creature into this sacred hall and for bearing the mark of forbidden magic, the sentence is purification by celestial fire. For both of you, celestial fire." The words were not a sentence. They were an erasure. A cleansing reserved for the most abominable of corruptions. For a moment, Kaelin did not breathe. The world narrowed to the sight of his father's impassive face and the glowing runes on the walls, which now felt less like light and more like the hungry embers of a pyre. The two royal guards, their silver armor gleaming, took a synchronized step forward, their hands resting on the pommels of their crystalline swords. They would not draw them. They wouldn't need to. They were merely escorts to oblivion. Kaelin's mind screamed, but his throat was locked in ice. He looked down at Brenna's still form, at the faint rise and fall of her chest. They would burn her for the crime of being saved. They would burn him for the crime of saving her. It was a perfect, elegant, elven solution. As the guards closed the distance, a sudden, unnatural cold flooded the chamber. It did not come from the stone, but from Kaelin and Brenna themselves. The shadowy marks on Kaelin's arm flared with a light-devouring blackness, and an identical pattern bloomed across Brenna's cheek, stark against her pale skin. A low hum vibrated in the air, a sound of pure negation, and the guards flinched back as if they had touched a frozen forge. The light from the runes flickered, dimming for a heartbeat. The magic of the bond, sensing a mortal threat to its hosts, was lashing out. "Enough," a new voice commanded, sharp and clear as a striking bell. Lady Lyra, an elven loremaster whose age was said to rival the oldest trees, stepped forward. Her hair was the white of a winter moon, and her eyes held the wisdom of ages that Lord Theron's had traded for power. "My lord, you see? This is not a simple curse. It is reactive, volatile. To destroy the vessels without understanding the force contained within could unleash it upon us all." Lord Theron's gaze shifted to Lyra, his lips a thin, hard line. He had not anticipated dissent, and certainly not a public display of this unknown magic. For a political creature like Theron, an unknown variable was more dangerous than a known enemy. He weighed his options, the silent calculation visible in his eyes. Executing them now could make him look rash, fearful. A ruler must always appear in control. "Your caution is noted, Loremaster," he conceded, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He turned to the guards. "Take them to the weeping cells. The deep stone will contain whatever taint they carry. We will deliberate on the nature of this purification." It was a temporary reprieve, not a pardon. A cage instead of a pyre. The guards, visibly relieved to not have to touch the source of that unnatural cold, hauled Kalen to his feet. He didn't resist, scooping Brenna back into his arms with his remaining strength and following them out of the chamber, the weight of 100 hateful stares burning his back. The weeping cells were carved below the roots of the city, a place where the stone constantly used a magically inert moisture designed to smother any arcane power. They were thrown into the darkness, the heavy, rune-etched door booming shut behind them. Kalen gently laid Brenna on the cold, damp floor. The shadowy marks on them both receded, the magic seemingly dormant in this nullifying environment. It was here, in the suffocating silence, that Brenna finally stirred. Her earthy eyes snapped open, darting around the darkness before landing on Kalen. "You," she rasped, her voice a low growl. She tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her side. "Where is this? What have you done, you pointed-eared snake?" The slur, a common dwarven insult, was filled with generations of ingrained hatred. "I brought you here to save your life," Kalen replied, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Save me," she scoffed, a bitter laugh catching in her throat. "By bringing me to a place where my people have been hated for 100 years? I saw their faces. They look at me like I'm filth. I'd rather have bled out on the forest floor than die in an elven cage." Her pride, the unyielding core of her dwarven spirit, was a fire even this damp cell could not extinguish. "And you would have," Kalen shot back, his own desperation finally boiling over. "And I would have died with you. Don't you understand? We are bound. Linked. That poison in your veins is in my magic. That cold in your heart is in my soul. Your council sentenced us both to death by fire." Brenna stared at him, the raw truth in his words finally cutting through her fury. She looked down at her own arm, at the faint, grayish tracery beneath her skin, then back at the identical, though darker, marks on his. The horrifying reality of their situation began to sink in, silencing her. They were not just prisoners. They were two sides of the same death sentence. The sound of the lock turning made them both flinch. The door creaked open, revealing the imposing silhouette of Lord Theron. He stood there, a figure of untouchable authority, his eyes cold and distant. "The council has been persuaded to grant you a single opportunity," he announced, his voice devoid of any warmth. "The sentence stands, but it will be stayed on one condition." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the small cell. Ancient texts speak of a place where all magics can be unraveled, the sunken archives of Eredor. You will journey there and find a way to sever this unnatural bond. You have until the winter solstice, 2 moons from now. If you succeed, you may live your separate, insignificant lives. If you fail or do not return, the pyre will be waiting. He turned to leave, the offer hanging in the air like a hangman's noose. As his footsteps faded, Lady Lyra's spectral form shimmered into existence for just a second in the doorway, visible only to Kalen. Her voice was a mere whisper in his mind, but it carried the weight of a tombstone. "Do not be fooled by his mercy, Kalen," she warned, her spectral eyes filled with pity. "No one has returned from the sunken archives in 500 years. Your father is not giving you a chance. He is giving you a grave. A grave." The word echoed in the oppressive silence of the cell long after Lady Lyra's form had faded. Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp stone. It was the cold certainty of his father's intent. This wasn't a mission. It was a cleaner, more politically palatable form of execution. Exile disguised as a quest. He looked over at Brenna, who was now sitting up, her expression a mixture of defiance and dawning horror. She had heard Theron's decree, but not Lyra's ghostly warning. Yet, even without it, her mountain-honed instincts could surely sense the trap. A dwarf knows the difference between a pathway and a tomb. For a long moment, neither spoke, the only sound the rhythmic drip of water, like a slow countdown to their shared demise. "So, the sunken archives of Eredor," Brenna finally said, her voice rough, breaking the tension. "My grandfather used to tell stories about that place. A city of knowledge, built by the first men, swallowed by the earth in a magical cataclysm ages ago." He said the paths to it are forgotten, guarded by illusions and beasts of shadow. He called it the scholar's folly. She ran a hand over the rough stone floor, her geomantic senses testing the world around her. He also said it was a lie, a cautionary tale to keep young dwarves from digging too deep and too greedily. She looked up at Kaelin, her earthy eyes searching his face. Your father sends us to a myth? To a children's scary story. The accusation was clear. Your people are not just cruel, they're liars. Kaelin shook his head, pushing himself to his feet and pacing the small confines of the cell. It's real, he admitted, his voice low. The elven libraries have references to it, though they are heavily censored. They speak of it as a place of immense power and corrupting knowledge, a place where the laws of magic itself were recorded, and could therefore be unwritten. He stopped and faced her. That's why it's so dangerous. That's why no one has returned in 500 years. The magic there is raw, primal. To seek to unravel a bond like ours in a place like that is like trying to fix a watch in the heart of a hurricane. The honesty of his fear was stark, stripped of any elven pretense. He was just as trapped as she was, and for the first time, Brenna saw not an arrogant elf, but another prisoner staring into the abyss. Their shared sentence forged a fragile, temporary truce. They were given meager supplies, a single bag with stale elven whey bread, a water skin, and a crude map that marked only the general direction of the blighted marshes, where the ruins of Eredor were rumored to lie. No weapons were permitted. Their expulsion from Silverwood was as humiliating as it was swift. They were escorted to the edge of the forest under the gray light of dawn, not as exiles on a quest, but as refuse being discarded. As they stepped past the shimmering magical barrier that protected the elven city, Kaelin felt a pang of loss so profound it almost brought him to his knees. He was 118 years old, and for every single day of that life, he had been an outsider within his own home. Now, he was an outsider to the world itself. Their first few hours of travel were a study in silent animosity. The forest, a place of serene beauty to any elf, was a suffocating, alien world to Brenna. She walked with a tense, low posture, her eyes constantly scanning the canopy above, unused to the lack of a stone ceiling. Kaelin, in turn, found her heavy, deliberate steps grating on his nerves, so different from the silent tread of his own people. The curse was a quiet thrum beneath their skin, a constant reminder of their forced proximity. Every so often, a wave of cold would wash over Kaelin, and he would glance back to see Brenna stumble, her face pale. A moment later, a flicker of shadow would cross his vision, and he'd hear her mutter a curse, asking if he was trying to trip her with his elf magic. They were a discordant pair, bound by magic but separated by a canyon of racial history. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, they reached the edge of a ravine. A fallen, moss-covered log served as a makeshift bridge over a churning stream 50 feet below. Kaelin, with his innate elven balance, could have crossed it in his sleep. He started across, but a sharp intake of breath behind him made him pause. He turned to see Brenna frozen at the edge, her knuckles white as she gripped a nearby tree. Root. She was staring down at the drop, her face a mask of sheer terror. What is it? He asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. It is just a log. She didn't answer, her breathing becoming ragged. It was then that he understood. Dwarves were creatures of the deep earth, of enclosed spaces and solid ground. This open, dizzying height was as terrifying to her as a sealed tomb would be to him. He saw the tremor in her hands, the sweat on her brow. This wasn't stubbornness or pride. It was a deep, instinctual fear. In that moment, he didn't see a dwarf, an enemy. He saw someone just as vulnerable as he felt. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation, and walked back to her side. I am not going to let you fall, he said, his voice softer than he intended. He held out his hand. Do you trust me? Brenna looked from the terrifying drop to his outstretched hand, then to his gray, serious eyes. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust any elf. But she also knew she could not cross this chasm alone. Her entire being screamed against it, against showing weakness to her captor, her reluctant partner. But the alternative was to remain here, waiting for the curse to consume her. With a shaky hand, she reached out and took his. His grip was surprisingly firm, his skin cool to the touch. It was the first time they had made physical contact by choice. As they took their first step onto the log together, the shadowy mark on Kalen's arm pulsed with a faint, warm light, a sensation he had never felt before. The world did not erupt in fire and lightning. It simply went silent. The snarls of the marshhounds died in their throats, replaced by whimpers of pure, primal terror. It was not a physical attack Kalen had unleashed, but an emotional one. A wave of absolute despair, of profound loneliness and cold, washed over the clearing. The sickly green light in the hound's eyes sputtered and died, replaced by a reflection of a starless, empty void. The very color seemed to drain from the world, leaving only shades of gray and black. The beasts, their corrupted rage smothered by a force far older and more terrible, broke and fled, not running from a threat, but from the crushing certainty of their own insignificance. They scattered into the mists, their terrified cries fading into the sudden, deafening silence. The moment the last hound vanished, the oppressive shadow receded, collapsing back into Kalen as if he were a vacuum. The color rushed back into the world with a nauseating speed. Kalen staggered, a choked gasp escaping his lips. He fell to his knees, his body racked with violent shivers, his breath pluming in the air as if it were the dead of winter. The dark patterns on his skin faded back to their dormant state, but the cost of using his magic was terrifyingly clear. His skin was deathly pale, tinged with a bluish hue, and his lips were the color of faded bruises. He looked at Brenna, his now gray eyes wide with a mixture of shock at what he'd done and a deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. "It takes the warmth," he whispered, before his eyes rolled back and he slumped to the muddy ground, unconscious. Brenna stared, her heart hammering against her ribs. One moment, she was facing certain death. The next, she was saved by a power so unnatural it made her very bones ache. Her dwarven instincts, honed by generations of distrust for elven magic, screamed at her to run, to leave him. Whatever that unholy power was, it was a contamination, a blight. But she couldn't move. He had saved her. He had placed his body in front of hers, and when that wasn't enough, he had unleashed the very essence of his being, the thing that made his own people despise him, to protect her. Her gaze fell on his shivering form, his vulnerability a stark contrast to the terrifying power he had just wielded. He looked small and fragile and utterly alone. With a dwarven curse muttered under her breath, she knelt beside him. When her fingers brushed against his neck to check for a pulse, she recoiled. His skin was as cold as marble. Pragmatism won out over prejudice. She couldn't leave him, not just because he had saved her, but because of the bond. If he froze to death in the swamp, she would likely follow. Grunting with effort, she dragged him to the relative shelter of a large, gnarled root system. Her hands, strong and calloused from her work as a geomante, moved with surprising gentleness as she propped him up. He was a dead weight, his elven frame heavier than it looked. She gathered dry tinder with a frantic energy, her fingers striking a piece of flint against a shard of iron or from her pocket until a spark caught. Soon, a small, sputtering fire was crackling, pushing back the oppressive gloom of the marsh. She settled Kalen as close to the flames as she dared, pulling her own thick cloak over him. Hours passed. She kept watch, her eyes darting into the darkness, listening. But the marsh was silent. The beasts would not be returning. Eventually, Kalen stirred, his groans weak. His eyes fluttered open and found her sitting across the fire, watching him. "You stayed," he said, his voice a faint rasp. "Our fates are linked, elf," she replied gruffly, though her tone lacked its usual bite. "Your death is an inconvenience I cannot afford." He gave a weak, humorless smile. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackle and pop of the fire. "What was that?" she finally asked, her voice low. "That a power?" Kalen stared into the flames, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his pale face. "It is the legacy of my bloodline, the reason for my name. 400 years ago, during the Great Schism, my ancestors made a pact with something of the void. to absorb a magical plague that threatened the world. They became its vessel, its prison. In return, they were granted power over shadow, fear, and silence. My people called it a corruption. They exiled us, branded us, and have spent every generation since trying to breed the shadow out of our blood. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a lifetime of shame. They have almost succeeded. The power is faint in me. I was taught to fear it, to suppress it. I have never let it out like that before. Brenna processed this, her brow furrowed. The stories the dwarves told were of power-hungry elves dabbling in dark arts for conquest. But his story, it was one of sacrifice. It did not feel evil, she said, surprising even herself. Your father's words felt evil. His judgment. That, it just felt quiet. And very, very cold. Kalen looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. A shared warmth from the fire held them in a moment of truce, two outcasts finding a sliver of understanding in a cursed swamp. He was weak, and she was his protector. As exhaustion finally claimed him and he drifted into a fitful sleep, Brenna tended the fire. She felt a strange tingling in her side, where the original wound had been. It wasn't the usual cold ache of the curse, but a gentle warmth, like sunlight on stone. Confused, she pulled up the sleeve of her tunic to look at her arm. Her breath caught in her throat. The gray, vein-like patterns of the petrifying curse, which had been slowly, relentlessly spreading towards her heart, had not advanced. In fact, they seemed fainter, less defined than they had been that morning. They had receded. His darkness was healing her. Brenna stared at her arm, her mind reeling. It made no sense. How could a power born of shadow and cold, a magic that literally drained the warmth from its user, have a healing effect? It defied every principle of magic she had ever known, dwarven, elven, or otherwise. Light heals. Fire cauterizes. Earth restores. Shadow it consumes. Yet, the evidence was etched into her own skin. The creeping petrification, a force she could feel grinding away at her life force, had been pushed back. She looked at Kalen, his face peaceful in sleep, the firelight softening the harsh lines of his exhaustion. His sacrifice had not only saved them from the marsh hounds, but it had also bought her time. A profound and deeply unsettling thought took root in her mind. His curse might be her only cure. The next few days established a new, fragile rhythm. Kalen remained weak, recovering slowly from his expenditure of power. The ordeal had taken a visible toll, leaving him prone to shivering fits and a lingering exhaustion that even his elven stamina couldn't shake. The roles were now completely reversed. Brenna became the leader, the protector. Her dwarven resilience, born from a life of hardship, came to the forefront. She found them clean water, identified edible roots the blight hadn't touched, and kept the fire going through the long, damp nights. Her senses, no longer overwhelmed by the land's agony, became their greatest asset. She could feel the stable patches of ground, guiding them away from treacherous sinkholes and quicksand that would have otherwise been invisible. During this time, they began to talk. Not with the guarded, resentful brevity of before, but with the quiet candor of two people who had nothing left to lose. Kalen, stripped of his elven pride by his own weakness, spoke of his life in Silverwood. He described the loneliness of being the 118-year-old Shadowstain, the constant pressure from his father, Lord Theron, to be perfect in every other way to compensate for his flawed heritage. He spoke of the other elves, who would smile at him with their lips, but whose eyes held only pity or disgust. Brenna listened, her usual scowl softening into a neutral expression. His pain was not so different from her own. As a Geomante in a warrior clan, she was considered an eccentric. Her quiet communion with the stone seen as less valuable than the ring of a smith's hammer or the swing of a battle axe. She was respected for her skill, but never truly understood. They were both outcasts among their own people, defined by the one thing that made them different. One evening, as Brenna was reinforcing their shelter for the night, Kalen watched her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "When you raised that wall of stone, I felt it," he said, his voice still a little weak. "Not just the tremor in the ground. I felt the strain inside you. like you were trying to bend a bar of solid iron with your will. Brenna paused, looking over at him. And when you unleashed that, she countered, gesturing vaguely, it was like the world fell away. Like hearing a sound so low it's not a sound at all, just a pressure in your chest. A feeling of absolute finality. They were describing the echoes of their power, the feedback loop created by the bond. They were experiencing secondhand what it was like to be each other. The realization hung in the air between them, profound and a little frightening. This bond was more than a shared death sentence. It was a bridge between their very souls. As Kalen's strength returned, so did the urgency of their quest. They were running out of time. They pushed deeper into the blighted marshes, which eventually gave way to a landscape of jagged, black rock and petrified trees. It was a dead land, silent and sterile. According to the crude map, they were close. It was Brenna who found it. She stopped abruptly, her head cocked as if listening to a distant sound. "Here," she said, her voice filled with. She placed her hands on a seemingly solid cliff face of obsidian-like rock. "There is nothing here," Kalen said, walking up beside her. "No," she whispered, her eyes closed in concentration. "Not nothing. Hollowness. A great, vast hollowness shielded. Not by stone, but by silence." Her geomantic senses had detected not an entrance, but the absence of one, an illusion designed to trick the eye and the ear. "It is a riddle," she murmured. "The entrance does not yield to force. It yields to resonance." She began to hum, a low, guttural dwarven chant that vibrated deep in her chest. The sound was ancient, a song of the deep earth, of pressure and time. Kalen watched, fascinated, as the air around the rock face began to shimmer. He felt an answering hum deep within himself, the familiar cold of his shadow magic stirring, not with menace, but with a strange curiosity. The dwarven chant was about the unmovable, the permanent, the unchanging. On impulse, Kalen added his own voice, not a song, but a whispered elven verse about stillness, about the silence between stars, the void, the unmade. The two sounds, one of deep stone and one of empty space, twined together. Earth and shadow, presence and absence. The rock face in front of them began to glow with faint, geometric lines, forming a massive, intricate doorway where seconds before there had been only solid stone. With a low groan that sounded like the world's first breath, the gateway to the sunken archives of Eredor swung inward, revealing a spiraling staircase descending into utter, perfect darkness. As they stood on the precipice, Brenna glanced at Kalen, her expression unreadable. "It seems my people's songs of the earth, and your people's whispers of the void, were meant to be sung together." The darkness within the sunken archives was unlike any Kalen had ever known. It wasn't the simple absence of light he was used to in the deep forest nights, nor was it the oppressive, hungry void of his own magic. This was a physical presence, a heavy, silent blanket woven from immense age and forgotten knowledge. It smelled of dry parchment, dust, and ozone, the scent of dormant magic. As the great stone door sealed shut behind them with a deep final boom that echoed down into the depths, they were plunged into absolute blackness. For a heart-stopping moment, Kalen felt a surge of panic, the primal elven fear of being buried alive. But then Brenna's voice, calm and steady beside him, cut through the dread. "Give me a moment. The stone will speak." Kalen waited, hearing only the sound of his own breathing and the frantic beat of his heart. Then, a soft, golden light began to emanate from Brenna's hands. She was holding a smooth, palm-sized lodestone from her pocket, and as she channeled her energy into it, it pulsed with a gentle, warm glow, illuminating a small circle around them. They stood at the top of a massive spiral staircase carved from a single, continuous piece of obsidian. The walls were lined not with shelves, but with millions of crystalline shards of every shape and size, embedded directly into the stone like glittering, chaotic mosaics. The staircase descended further than their light could penetrate, hinting at a depth that was truly staggering. "This place wasn't built," Brenna whispered, her voice filled with a craftsman's reverence. "It was grown. The magic here is so old it has become part of the geology." They began their descent, their footsteps the only sound in the vast chamber. With every step they took, the crystals on the walls seemed to hum with a faint, resonant energy. Kalen reached out and lightly brushed his fingers against one of the shards. An image instantly flooded his mind. A star-filled sky, but with constellations he had never seen, wheeling above a silver city with spires that pierced the clouds. The vision was gone in a flash, leaving him dizzy and breathless. "These are memory crystals," he realized, his voice hushed with, "This isn't a library of books. It's a library of experiences of souls." They had stumbled upon a repository of knowledge so vast and ancient it predated the elves, the dwarves, perhaps even the world as they knew it. To find the specific knowledge they needed to sever their bond here would be like finding a single grain of sand on an infinite beach. Hours bled into what felt like days as they descended. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the unchanging darkness. Their conversations became whispers, as if speaking too loudly might awaken the sleeping memories in the walls. They learned to navigate the library's unique interface. Brenna, with her connection to the stone, could sense the general topic of a section. Here, the resonant frequency of ancient wars. There, the quiet vibration of forgotten philosophies. Kalen, with his shadow-touch senses, could feel the emotional weight of the memories, the searing heat of a lover's betrayal, the cold emptiness of a king's regret. Working together, they became a key and a lock, navigating the impossible archive with a strange, unspoken synergy. He would pinpoint an area heavy with the scent of binding and sacrifice, and she would then tune her senses to find the specific crystalline frequency of severance and release. They finally came to a halt on a vast, circular platform deep within the archive. In the center of the platform was a single, towering crystal, 10 feet tall, that pulsed with a soft, internal light of its own. Unlike the others, this one was perfectly clear, and floating within it were two shimmering, intertwined ribbons of light, one the color of dark earth, the other the color of a starless night sky. "This is it," Kalen said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is the core of the archive's knowledge on soul binding." As they approached, the crystal brightened, and the air crackled with power. The curse on their arms flared, the marks glowing intensely as if in response to the immense concentration of relevant magic. It was here they would find their answer. Brenna placed her hand on the crystal's smooth surface. A voice, ancient and genderless, spoke not in their ears, but directly inside their minds. Asterisk, "You seek to unravel that which has been woven. The thread can be cut, but the tapestry will be forever changed. A price must be paid. A memory for a memory. A life for a life." Asterisk, the archive was offering them a choice, a ritual. To sever the bond, one of them would have to pour their life force into the crystal, effectively erasing themselves from existence. Their memories, their very being, would be consumed to power the sundering, leaving the other free, but alone. The implication was horrific. It wasn't just death. It was complete and total non-existence. They would not be remembered, for they would never have been. One of them had to make the ultimate sacrifice for the other to live. They looked at each other, the golden light of Brenna's lodestone casting long shadows across their faces. The hatred that had once defined them was a distant memory. In its place was a deep, complicated bond of respect, understanding, and something more, something neither of them dared to name. To destroy one to save the other was unthinkable. "There has to be another way," Brenna said, her voice shaking slightly as she pulled her hand away from the crystal. The archive's voice responded, its tone unchanging and absolute. Asterisk, "The union is one of balance. Shadow and earth. To remove one requires a void of equal measure. This is the law of magic. It cannot be unwritten." Asterisk, as the voice faded, the crystal's light dimmed, but the two intertwined ribbons within it continued to swirl. Then, Kalen noticed something new. At the very center of the crystal, where the two ribbons of light touched, a third, impossibly faint spark of light had appeared. It was the color of dawn, a fusion of gold and silver, earth and sky. The archive had presented a law, but the crystal was showing them an exception. It wasn't just showing them a way to sever the bond. It was showing them what the bond was becoming. And the archive's voice spoke one final, chilling sentence in their minds, a truth so shocking it shattered everything they thought they knew. Asterisk, the ritual you seek does not exist. The unraveling is a lie, told to the Elven King 400 years ago to justify the Great Schism. This bond cannot be severed. It can only be completed. Asterisk. A lie. The word hung in the ancient silence, heavier than all the stone above them. A lie. The entire foundation of Kaelin's life, the shame of his bloodline, the exile of his ancestors, the sentence handed down by his own father, was built upon a deliberate deception. The Great Schism, the event that had defined his people for 400 years, was not a necessary act to contain a dark corruption. It was a political purge, justified by a manufactured fear. The sunken archives had not offered them a chance at freedom. It had revealed the truth of their cage. Kaelin stumbled back from the crystal, his mind reeling as the implications crashed down upon him. His father hadn't sent him here to die in a forgotten tomb. He had sent him here because he knew the archives held the one truth that could shatter his reign, a truth he was certain would be buried forever along with his inconvenient, shadow-touched son. Completed. Brenna's voice was a ragged whisper, pulling Kaelin from his spiraling thoughts. She was still staring at the crystal, at the tiny nascent spark of dawn-colored light where their two essences met. What does it mean, completed? The crystal did not answer with words, but with feeling. A wave of pure understanding washed over them, a memory drawn from the archive that was not a vision, but an emotion. It was a feeling of perfect balance, of wholeness. It was the feeling of a lock finding its key, of a melody finding its harmony. It was the feeling of two halves becoming one. The curse was never a curse. It was a symbiotic bond, a dormant magic of union that had been twisted by fear and lies into something to be reviled. It wasn't killing them, it was transforming them. The petrification and the life-draining cold were the chaotic symptoms of an incomplete fusion, two powerful magics fighting each other, because their wielders were fighting each other. As this truth settled into their souls, the marks on their arms began to glow, not with the cold fire of before, but with the gentle, warm light of that third, dawn-like essence. The pain in Kaelin's chest eased. The creeping cold in Brenna's veins subsided. They looked at each other, and for the first time, they truly saw. They saw the strength in their differences, the way his silent shadows complemented her immovable earth. They saw the shared loneliness that had defined their lives, and the impossible flicker of hope for a future where they were no longer alone. The choice was never about sacrifice. It was about acceptance. "My father lied," Kaelin said, his voice shaking with a cold, quiet rage. "He condemned my entire family line to centuries of shame, for a lie. He tried to have us executed for a lie." Brenna walked over to him, her expression a mixture of anger on his behalf and a fierce, protective resolve. "Then we will take the truth back to them," she said, her voice like the grinding of mountains. "We will show them what they threw away." The journey back was a blur. Armed with the truth, the world seemed different. The blighted marshes were no longer a place of death, but a land wounded and in need of healing. The divisions between their peoples seemed not like immutable laws of nature, but like crumbling walls built of fear. Their bond, now a source of strength instead of a weakness, guided them. When Kaelin felt exhaustion, Brenna's earthy resilience would flow into him, steadying his steps. When her senses were overwhelmed, his calming shadow would shield her mind. They moved as one, their path sure and swift. They emerged from the forest not as two desperate exiles, but as a single, unified purpose. They did not sneak back into Silverwood. They walked through the main gate, in the full light of day. Elven guards, stunned into inaction, could only stare as the shadow elf and the dwarf woman strode past them, the glowing marks on their skin visible for all to see. They walked directly to the High Council chamber, the great moon-crusted doors swinging open before them. The council was in session, and at their entrance, a shocked silence fell for the second time. Lord Theron was on his feet, his face a perfect mask of cold fury, but this time, Kaelin saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "You were given a task," Theron boomed, trying to seize control. "Have you severed the unnatural bond?" Kaelin met his father's gaze, his own eyes clear and steady. "There is nothing unnatural about it," he declared, his voice ringing with a power no one in that chamber had ever heard from him. and it cannot be severed. It can only be completed. We have come not to beg for our lives, but to show you the truth you tried to bury 500 years ago." He reached out and took Brenna's hand. As their fingers intertwined, the marks on their arms erupted in a brilliant, blinding flash of dawn-colored light. It was not a violent explosion, but a gentle, pervasive wave of pure magic that washed through the chamber. It was a light that held the unshakable strength of the mountain and the profound peace of the deep shadows. It was a light of perfect balance. In that light, every elf in the room felt it. The memory from the archive, the truth of the bond, the story of the great schism's lie. They felt the sacrifice Kaelin's ancestors had made and the political betrayal that had branded them traitors. They saw the history of their hatred for the dwarves not as a noble struggle, but as a petty feud built on falsehoods. The serene masks of the council members cracked, revealing shock, shame, and for some, a dawning horror at their own ignorance. The entire kingdom, in that moment, was forced to witness the beautiful, undeniable truth. And as the light subsided, revealing Kaelin and Brenna standing together, their hands clasped, their magic intertwined into a single, harmonious whole, Lord Theron could only stare, his face ashen. He had not just lost an argument. He had lost a war that had been raging for centuries, defeated not by an army, but by the unbreakable love between an elven outcast and a dwarven geomante. And so, a story that began with a death sentence ends with the birth of a new truth. The bond between Kaelin and Brenna was never a curse, it was a reflection. It mirrored the poison of a world that chose division over unity, a world that taught its children to fear what they did not understand. Their journey was not to find a cure for themselves, but to become the cure for everyone else. It forces us to ask a difficult question. If the world condemned you for the very essence of who you are, and the only person who could save you was your sworn enemy, would you have the courage to trust them? Would you be brave enough to see past the labels and find the soul within? Their story teaches us that the most powerful walls are not built of stone, but of fear. The most ancient lies can be shattered by a single, defiant act of compassion. We are left to wonder about the bonds in our own lives. What would you do if you discovered the greatest curse you carried was actually your most profound gift, just waiting for the right person to help you unlock it? It's a reminder that true connection isn't about finding someone who is the same as you, but about having the strength to build a bridge to someone who is different. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe that love is a force more powerful than any law or border, then follow our channel for more tales that challenge the heart. Like this video to help this message reach others, and share it with someone who understands that our differences are not meant to divide us, but to make us whole.